Hello and welcome to this edition of Wednesday Palaver. This is 3 of the series of discussions on the current economic crisis, not just in Ghana, but throughout Africa and in most parts of the world. Now, what is the problem? What is the root of this economic crisis? What is causing the economic crisis? Is there a way out? Some have suggested that socialism is the only way out. In today's conversation, we have with us Comrade Trie Opoku, the convener of the socialist movement of Ghana, and we'll be talking about the socialist alternative, which would deal with this economic crisis. The format is very, very simple. I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and the studio audience also has the opportunity to ask questions. And then somewhere towards the end of this conversation, we're going to go to a social media platform, WhatsApp, YouTube, Facebook, and so on, and allow all of you who are watching us on social media to also ask the important questions. It is my honor and pleasant duty to welcome to the studio Comrade Trie Opoku, convener of the Socialist Movement.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, what is the nature of this crisis? What is the crisis itself? What is the crisis?
Thank you. I think the crisis has a number of dimensions. Most fundamental is that productive people who are engaged in producing the food that we eat, who are engaged in building the houses that we live in, who are engaged in providing services, a whole range of services, transports, etc., do not have any real control over the conditions in which they work. The entirety of those systems are organized around the principle of profit making for a few people. They are not organized rationally in terms of meeting the needs of the society, but they're organized around the principle of making profit for a few people, a few individuals who are called capitalists. And the demands of making profit require that the work that you do, a large portion of that work is increasingly taken away from you and paid over to the capitalists. So you have a situation in which ordinary people who work are being squeezed. Every time you engage in production activity, some of the wealth that you create for society, that you should participate in, that your community should participate in, is being taken away as profit for a few individuals. The history of it, of course, is that those individuals happen to have come from Europe, from America, from Japan in the last 50 years or so. So it is often seen as a racial problem. But the truth is that it's a problem of the structure of our economies. They're designed to create money, value for people who most of us will never see, not to solve the problems of the people who produce.
But how come that the leadership, the Ghanaian leadership, the African leadership, and so on, allows this to happen? Because it weakens their own grip on power. I mean, it is said that Ghana is broke, totally broke. How come that these leaders do not see the threat to their own power?
Well, I guess, again, there are a number of things. The most fundamental thing is that if you have a class system, you have a system organized around profit. Part of that profit goes to building alliances that stabilize the system. It's not possible, just in terms of the sheer numbers, for a tiny minority of people to exploit the vast majority of people. It is possible only because the capitalist minority are able to build alliances around issues like tribe, around issues like party, etc., to ensure that they have people working within the larger polity who are able to stabilize the system. So that in Ghana, for example, dating back to the colonial period, you had an alliance between the colonial government and chiefs. So the process of empowering chiefs is something that took place largely during the colonial period. And what that meant was that chiefs served as local government agents for the Brits, for the British colonial government. And they were given powers that they did not have traditionally. And those powers continue today. And you find that our first crop of politicians, our first crop of former civil politicians came from that class, from the chieftaincy class. So their interests were aligned with those of the colonial state, the state that had empowered them to become wealthy, to become privileged. Their interests were aligned. And the interests of their children who got into formal politics and so on were also aligned more to the British colonial and therefore capitalist system than to their own people. And that continues today. It's not very difficult if you look at the characters who dominate national politics. You don't have to go back more than a generation to find some chief. It is still the case that these are people who have benefited for the last 100 years or so from their relationship with what was then the colonial empire, and which was really just the political expression of capitalism in this part of the world.
How does this capitalist path to development explain the huge hole in the national economy? I'm talking about the deficit. I mean, the fact, for example, that total national revenue is not able to do anything, just for debt servicing, public sector emoluments, and then it's finished, and then we are in debt. How does this capitalist enterprise explain that hole in the national economy?
The hole is systemic. For every productive activity that is undertaken, it is structured as cost recovery and profit. The profits inevitably are repatriated, as they call it, to the capitalists. Now, as capitalist competition intensifies, and as they spend more and more money on wasteful activities, wasteful competitive activities, they require more and more. There's only so much of any product you can sell. So eventually you get to a stage where they begin to do things that fall outside of the classical characterization, classical description of capitalism per se, and they begin to steal money. Okay, so essentially, greater and greater percentages of the productive value of the society are being extracted. Exploitation is becoming more and more intense. So there will always be a hole. And all you have are different ways of arranging the hole. But the hole itself is growing.
Now, all the major players, major political players, NDC leaders, NPP leaders, so-called civil society leaders and so on, their solution is just simple: go to the IMF. Is that a solution?
Well, it obviously is not a sustainable solution. We've been there. This is, I think, our 17th time since...
Actually, 19th, if you count the 2 times that the Akufo-Addo government has been there already.
Okay. Okay, so 19 times since the overthrow in 66. That's less than every 5 years. So if a resort to IMF was going to deliver the kind of structural change that would secure our economy, if that was in fact the case, it would have happened by now. 19, you can't keep doing something 19 times and expecting a different result. The truth of the matter is that the IMF was set up as part of the post-war system to stabilize trade and finances. And even though it is structured as a fund that our governments are part of, what it serves is to stabilize markets. It works more for the creditors than it does for the people in the countries who are borrowing this money. So what it does is essentially, one, to make sure you prioritize paying your debts above any other developmental needs. Debts come first. Second, and in return for that, it might try and reschedule some of those debts. It will assist you to a certain extent to reschedule those debts, to the extent that these are also sovereign debts. They're coming from other countries, from multilateral players like the World Bank and EU and so on. Those debts can be rescheduled. But in return for that, they put you on a policy program. Now that policy program ultimately leads you back into crisis, because they're saying, one, reduce employment. So through the people who have got jobs, however poorly paid the jobs are, at least they have jobs. IMF will insist on a freeze on employment, will insist on cutting down employment in various sectors, particularly in the state sector and so on. IMF will insist on freedom of capital to move around in and out of the country. So the few dollars that you have, that you retain to buy medicine, to buy spare parts and so on, you have to agree that those dollars can flow out of the country. They can flow out of the economy back to the owners of capital. IMF will insist on reducing the size of the state. The arguments that are made are usually in terms of efficiency, that it's more efficient to let the private sector handle certain kinds of investment and so on. So IMF says, sell your telecoms, you sell it. They say, sell your electric company, you try and sell it. I mean, of course, the character of the sale, the legal transactions are different from the hard economic fact, which is that you've lost control over ECG. Sell your water, sell your state transport. All the things that would together ensure a certain safety net for your working people are being stripped away and being turned into currencies and being sold to foreign enterprises. The result is that within 2 or 3 years, you are back in even deeper crisis as a government. For the moment, forget the masses. But as a government, you're back in even deeper crisis than you were before. Because IMF gives you a clean bill of health, you go and borrow money. What do you do with it? You use it to restructure your banking sector. You spend more money restructuring the banking sector than the banking sector actually owed. 2 or 3 times as much. And what it means is that you have no depth as an economy. Okay. So inevitably, IMF will lead you back into the same crisis that you were in 2, 3, 4 years ago.
But perhaps it's the time to bring in the studio audience. So, studio, if you have questions, if you have comments to make, just show by hand and we'll invite you to do that. And then immediately after the studio audience, we'll go onto our social media platforms and take the comments and the questions. And if Ivan Barnes is standing by, please get ready. We're going to go to the social media pretty soon. Studio audience, anybody with a comment, anybody with a question? Yes, sir.
My question is, we are all saying socialism is the option. If SMG is given a chance to govern this country, Ghana, what can you do differently? Thank you.
Let's deal with this first, and then we can move on. Yes, please.
What do we do differently? The first thing is about the conversations that must take place about our development. We have to actually organize a national conversation. In that conversation, the kind of things that we would push for will be, one, food security. You'd have to talk about what is the food that people eat in this country, what is the food that people produce in this country, how do you draw a link? How do you draw a link and secure that supply so nobody's hungry? You'd have to talk about housing. How do you build houses in this country? How are houses financed? Shelter for everybody. And there are lots and lots and lots of examples of working people building their own houses. We don't have a land crisis, except in places like Accra and so on. But you can move out of Accra and you can build accommodation. You have at the moment now a false unemployment question. So take the youth, let them build their houses, let them occupy the houses, let them farm around the houses. Okay? You have to address transportation, not just people transport, but transportation for the food and so on. You have to think through how you solve those problems. Not simply run to consultants and say, come and give us a solution. Okay? But actually put Ghanaians. We've trained engineers, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Okay? We can build roads. We can build the roads we need to bring food to the urban areas where there's a large market. Okay? I would go back to things like we used to own as a society pharmaceutical industries. The one in Seoul, which now I think has been privatized. I think that one is now Tobinco or something. Okay. We decided what drugs we wanted to produce. We decided what research we wanted to conduct, what to prioritize. We're no longer able to do that. Somebody else is making those decisions and making them purely on the basis of how much profit he can make from providing A or providing B or providing C. There was a time when those decisions were based on what the society needs. I would go back to that. I would argue in a national forum that that's the kind of thing that we would need to do.
Your question somehow implied that the socialist movement of Ghana will or is making a bid for power.
When given a chance.
Yeah, but it must be clear that at this stage, the socialist movement of Ghana is not making a bid for power. Its role is to mobilize the masses, the working people and so on, around the concrete issues that affect them. Whether or not to make a bid for power, it's an issue for the future. It's not an issue for now. And I think we should be clear, on that. But, yes, sir.
Well, as a young man, I am full of hope as I sit here. First and foremost, as Africans, black people, we must know that we are not a forsaken people. Our founding father, Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah, said that nothing can be done without the support of God on 6 March 1957. The third president of America, Thomas Jefferson, said that I tremble for my country. He's a founding father of America. He said, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. In the last 6,000 years, we are the only people.
Can we make it brief? There may be so many people on social media and others who want to contribute, so please make it brief.
Yeah, so in conclusion, I know that the vision of the Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah, which is Pan-Africanism, will eventually be fulfilled as we are struggling against neocolonialism. That is the hope that I have, and I'm here to share.
What's your comments, if you have any?
Well, I don't know which of Nkrumah's books you've read, and I don't think the focus of Nkrumah's message was sit back and rely on God. It was about struggle. Nkrumah, above everything else, was about people struggling to transform their situation. It wasn't, sitting down and waiting for God to make things better. And I think also, when you talk about the American founding fathers, it's important not to look at it in the light of today's Republican Party and all these characters around. The American founding fathers, America was not founded as a Christian nation. The founding fathers came from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of religious and non-religious beliefs. What made America successful in a certain period in history was not about the favor of God. Slavery was not something, I'm sure your concept of God would not countenance slavery. Okay. But America built itself up upon the slave industry.
The God of
Okay.
This
not the slave versus God.
no. But this God thing is interesting, and it takes on different dimensions. You know, I mean, I heard our president Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo say that with God on our side, we'll overcome the problems. And I heard the finance minister make the same statement: with God on our side. And I've heard people from the opposition also talking about God, you know. And sometimes you have the exploiters talking about God and the exploiter talking about God. And I sit back and I wonder, what kind of God is this? A God who makes exploitation possible and a God who assists in the fight against exploitation. That must be a strange God. You know, very, very strange God. A God who is in everything and so on. What kind of God is that? In many cases, is God Ghanaian or African? Or is God American? I don't think that God is any of those things, even if there's a God omnipotent and omni, you know, presence and so on. So this God thing, I think we have to be very careful with it. You know that when the slaves were being shipped out of the Cape Coast and Elmina castles, it was the priests who were blessing the cargo. They claim to have been acting on behalf of God. When the Pope signed the papal bull authorizing the enslavement of African people, he was claiming to be acting on behalf of God. Is that the solution to our problems? I really doubt. I mean, this God thing, let's keep it where it belongs. You understand?
But
yes,
also, I mean, just
yes, no problem.
Not all Africans are black. I think you also need to be clear about that. Africa is a huge place. The people of all sorts of races who are here, who are Africans, who share in our perspective, who share in our struggle to transform this continent and to transform the world. It's not about color. Okay.
Yes, boss.
I just want to make some small comment. I just want to say that looking at the philosophies of the capitalist, what they've taught in the past, maybe about 300, 400 years, there's no way they can just come with a silver platter to Africa and say, we want you to be liberated. I think there's no way. The only way for Africans is to go the Pan-Africanist way, to struggle, to fight our own way, hold the bull by the horn and make sure we survive. We fight it anywhere for survival. I think that's what I was saying. Thank you very much.
Interesting statement. Except that I think it's important for us to realize that the problem is not African. It's the same problem which is occurring in Lebanon, same problem in Sri Lanka, same problem in the United States of America and so on. So the problem is not an African problem. I don't know what your comments are.
No, I agree entirely. It is not an African problem. It's a problem about production across the world. How is our ability to create wealth organized? What are the purposes for which it is organized? Because at the end of the day, what we're really talking about when we talk about socialism and capitalism is this question of how we organize production and therefore society. What rights do you create? What rights do you suppress? Okay. America works on a profit model. Of course, America does propaganda. So the films and things that you see here about America suggest a certain glamour. If you have lived there, you realize that the reality is very different from many, many, many people. Some of the richest people in the world out there, that's true. But there are also some of the poorest people in the world living there. And the same is true. Europe is a bit more egalitarian than the US, a bit more rational in certain senses. But you have the same essential problems. Europe, for example, is Western Europe is part of this insane assault on Russia that's going on, being presented to the rest of the world as a Ukraine war. It's essentially about escalating, surrounding, and disempowering Russia as a European state and as an Asian state, of course. But the problems are not different because they are not African. The root problem is the same. The histories are different, so they present themselves in different ways. But it's the same essential problem that we're talking about. How do you organize society's wealth? How do you organize, manage it so that it benefits many more of us? That's the issue.
There are those who have said that what is happening is a manifestation of the collapse of the neoliberal order. And the others who have said, yes, that is true, but it's not the whole truth. It is more than the neoliberal order which is facing collapse. What is your view? What is it that is collapsing before our eyes?
Okay. I certainly think the neoliberal order, what Thatcher and Reagan and so on put in place, is facing collapse. But I think it's more fundamental. I think that the set of institutions that came into place after World War II and so on are themselves under threat. They themselves, over a period of 30, 40 years, became neoliberal in their outlook and in their approach to the management of the third world, etc. But the collapse does not stop with the collapse of neoliberalism. I mean, the IMF might not survive this current crisis. The IMF might not survive it. You know, the World Bank, there are issues. If, for example, a new international trading currency emerges as a result of this Russian crisis and now the Chinese crisis that we have, this nonsense Pelosi went to do in Taiwan. If a new currency emerges, the power of the IMF, the power of the World Bank will be called in question. You know? So that whole set of institutions is threatened by the crisis that they themselves have produced. I mean, then go into it in greater detail. But it is a deep crisis. I'm not ruling out the capacity of capitalism to survive it. It has survived many, many crises in the past, and I wouldn't write it off, so easily. But there is a very, very deep crisis beyond neoliberalism to the fundamentals itself. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, you make a lot of sense. And then I think that Blaise Tulo should be standing by to take us through the social media messages just after this question. So Blaise, stand by.
So quick one. One of them I understand is an economic system which is very different from capitalism, feudalism, and even slavery. But you see, socialists want to be able to explore and develop their full potential as individuals and members of society while contributing to its welfare and growth. And this is the picture here. You are no more in barter trade system. So how can this come to play? Socialist generate wealth without having anything to do with capitalism or exploitation coming inside?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, to be honest. But yes.
I think there's a certain assumption that trade is necessarily capitalist. That's one of your assumptions, that trade is necessarily capitalist. And that the method of exchange, whatever it is essentially capitalist. But those assumptions are not solely true. We can deal with that.
There were markets before there was capitalism. There were markets before there was slavery. There were markets before there was feudalism. The question is, what kind of activity took place within those markets? Capitalist markets are structured to extract resources from circulation and move them into private hands, into a tiny minority. The markets are rigged. Okay. Under a socialist system, you will still find that the allocation of resources is done largely through markets. Guided markets, but still markets. You're not going to have some committee sitting upstairs, deciding if everybody what shirt you can wear in the morning, what color underpants you should be wearing, and so on. People will have choice. The point is to create wealth and allow people to use that wealth to express themselves. But you're interested in the collective. You're interested in making sure that everybody has a minimum. First of all, you want to make sure everybody eats. If there's enough for everybody to eat, and somebody wants to eat fufu, somebody wants to eat banku, that's fine. But you must organize your society so that the minimum nutritional requirements are met and improve the poor yearly, systematically, through planning. Okay. But the individual choices as to what to eat, what to wear, and so on, those are very much market decisions. But they are not market decisions which are designed to extract what little wealth you have and hand it over to Bill Gates or whoever. Does that make sense to you?
We can come back to that after the social media engagement. Blaze to the social media engagement.
Thank you very much, comrades. I'll read some messages from Facebook. This one is from Lillian Akusu Abediako. The Fair Wages and Salaries Commission says it has successfully completed drafting modalities for the payment of the cost of living allowance. Long English inquire, show working, pay the cola and stop talking big English. Annoying MPP government. This one is from Lillian Akusa, I think from the same person. Ghana, for let's just hang in there. This MPP government is on its way to opposition 2024. This is from Suleimana Abdul Rahim from Tamale. Socialism indeed is the best option for changing this country's fortunes. At this crucial moment, when life is whipping Ghanaians, the Vice President is telling us that Ghana card will end age cheating in football. How can you watch a football match when you are hungry? Okay, thank you very much. This is from Cephas. I should not like this message. I'll read it. Uncle Kwesi, I want us to establish Pratt Institution. You have a lot to offer this and future generations.
Yes, sir.
This is from Charles Dakra. Good evening, comrades. It is important for our leaders to know that taxes do not produce wealth and development. Wealth has to be produced out of nature from tilling the land or mining metals or turning raw materials into finished products for consumption. These things are done by the vast majority of the population who are peasants, laborers, traders, and the ordinary Ghanaian worker on the streets. Socialism is the only tool that can equally distribute the wealth generated by the working class among them. This is from Charles Dakra. This is from Azuma Besori. Good evening, comrades. Socialism is the best way now looking at what we face today. With socialism, we can industrialize our country. Thank you very much. This is from Stephen Boache. Nkrumah remains the best president ever. The current leadership of our country must stop arrogance and corruption and build the country. The next message is from Dennis Akwate. Respectfully, I want to find out from comrades if socialism can be said to be innate to humanity or a social construction to address the problems of inequity and inequality created by human activities. Shalom. This is from Dennis again. Can you explain how capitalism can end unemployment in our country? The next is from Bright Ajay. When dry bones are mentioned, all old persons start running away. So Ghanaians are now surprised that the NDC are shaking after MPP had elected a competent national leader. Thank you very much, all of you, for your message. I think these are the messages we have from Facebook.
That's fine. That's fine. We can proceed from there. But if you allow me, you know,
Of course.
over the last couple of months, I mean, all these calls keep coming. I mean, this morning there was one long letter and so on about how me as an individual, it's a solution. So it is not. You know, I speak on television. You may like what I say. I do things. You may like them and so on. All of the things that I do, say, and so on, it's not me. I mean, I'm in constant meeting and discussions with many others. I learn from them. I steal their ideas. I don't know what I would have been if it were not for the socialist movement of Ghana. I'm a product of the movement. The movement guides what I do and what I say and so on. And taking me out of the movement in the manner in which it's happening, I think I'm not comfortable with, because that is not a solution. We can all work together, we can all build a better society and so on. Let's use the socialist movement as the vehicle rather than an individual. You know, and there's no angel in the world. I'm not an angel. There's no angel in the world. You understand? So it's very important that we recognize this. I appreciate the confidence that people express in me. Yes, I appreciate it. I mean, for whatever it is worth and so on. But look, I've been in study groups with people like Tritri, like Atabri, and so on, for many years. I've learned from them. I've stolen their ideas. So when I'm speaking as all of them and not an individual. I think that this individual thing, we need to play it down a bit. You know, it's the movement which is important, not the individual. You know. Anyway, there is an issue. It's a problem. There is an issue, you know, and the issue is simply this. How does socialism take us out of the current crisis? How is socialism the alternative to what is happening and so on? And we've tried to explain it over and over again. What is happening simply is a continuation of the philosophy and practice which pushed the transatlantic slave trade. What is happening today is a continuation of classical colonialism. What is happening today is the application of all the methods which have failed to take the working people out of the crisis which production and distribution for profit has created in the world. And to that extent, the solution is to produce not for profit, not for monetary profit, but to produce in order to solve the concrete problems that confront mankind. And the only system which is about producing to solve the concrete problems of mankind is socialism. Socialism does not produce a profit. It doesn't distribute for profit. It distributes because there's a problem which needs to be solved. You train doctors because you have to prevent disease and cure disease. You understand? You train engineers because human beings have to move from one place to the other. They have to cross rivers and so on. You don't train to fatten the bank accounts of multinational corporations and so on. That's why socialism is the option. Now, Comrade Tritri Upoku, I think we can take your final remarks. Final remarks.
Okay. I think that, one, the points that have just been made about what socialism can do in different kinds of organization of society are very important. The question is, how do you get there? What is the process through which socialism can be practiced in Ghana, in West Africa, in Africa, globally? That ultimately is a political process. how do you get to the point where ordinary people in their numbers, in their communities, in their workplaces, are able to make decisions about production and to make them in a coordinated way that allows you to have an integrated society? How do you get there? The answer is organization. People need to begin to organize for what they believe in, for what they require to survive. It's not just about admiring Kwesi, and it's perfectly fine to admire Kwesi, but it is also important that we think as individuals and as families, as collectives, about what do we want? How do we get it? What are the processes through which we will get it? I mean, one of the people online made a point about cola. The dollar crossed 9 cedis today. It's gone above 9 cedis. So any cola you negotiated in June and you haven't paid yet because it's not funded, it's one thing to get government to agree.
And in a matter of 4 days, utility tariffs are going to go up by 25%. It hasn't been announced yet. I expect it to be announced in 4 days. 25% increase in utility tariffs. Your cola is gone.
Cola is gone. Cola is history. It's already history. It hasn't been implemented, and it's history. Are you going to do another cola? How will you fund it? The government doesn't have any money. You know? So what are the alternatives that we want to put in place? The cola is not a solution. Neither is the other thing that I heard online about everybody sort of keep calm. In 2 years' time, there'll be an election and an MP will go. Okay? MPPs going will not solve the problem. The people who have imposed this problem on the Ghanaian people are still out there. They still own the banks. They still own the oil companies. Okay? They still own the agribusiness that is taking over our farmland. Okay? They still operate in the way they operate today. That is not going to change because NDC becomes the next government. I think it's important that NDC becomes the next government, even if it's just to destabilize the system. But it won't change things fundamentally unless people demand that it changes. Unless people organize to demand change. If you're paying attention to the NDC primaries that are taking place right now, there's really very little difference between what MPP did and what NDC is doing right now. If you're listening to what NDC spokespeople are saying right now, they're not speaking about an alternative. In fact, NDC were the biggest cheerleaders of IMF. Go to IMF, and they took a lot of pride in having forced the government to go to IMF. But they don't have a program for helping us get out of this mess. Nobody in the political establishment, the political parties, has that perspective at this point in time. So the political musical chairs will take place. It happens. It will continue to happen. Its relevance to our problems is becoming thinner and thinner and thinner. We need more people to speak up and to act and to organize for real solutions. And there are things that we can do. I ran out of time here. Okay. I mean, the discussion will continue. So.
This discussion continues next week. And I want to hope that next week maybe Comrade Tripoku will be around again for this conversation to continue. Even if he's not sitting here, he could be sitting there, you know. Okay. So it will be useful if you come around next week. Well, viewers, this is the third in the series of the discussions on the economic crisis facing Ghana, Africa, and the world. And I do hope that all of us have learned a thing or two. It has shaped us to continue the struggle for total liberation. Next week we'll be coming back again, and I do hope that we'll continue this discussion. I'm going to say goodbye to all of you on social media, in your homes watching television and so on. But just a quick reminder that the best in everything is on Pan-African television. Best in sports, best in music, best in news, best in everything. It's on Pan-African television. So keep your dial on Pan-African television until we meet again next week. It's bye-bye from Wednesday Palaver.